In the book of Revelation, everything's straightforward. We have 22 chapters to 22 cards of the major arcana. Whereas in the minor arcana, the connection to the Gospels, to the chapters of the Gospels, is not as neat a fit, not mathematically anyway. We have 14 cards in every suit of the minor arcana that don't seem to neatly fit within the chapters of the Gospels. The Gospel of Matthew, in some sense, seems to be somewhat of a fit in that there's 28 chapters to the suit of wands, 14 cards. So we have a 2-to-1 ratio. But the other Gospels, like Mark, we have 16 chapters to the suit of pentacles, 14 cards. And the Gospel of Luke with 24 chapters to the suit of swords, 14 cards. And the Gospel of John with 21 chapters to the suit of cups, 14 cards. Mathematically, they don't really fit, but it's not mathematically that we're looking for, it's more thematically. Basically, the connections here are filled with meaning, not mathematical perfection. And we could simply begin by seeing this by just simply laying out the cards for every chapter. We have 14 cards to every suit, so laying out the cards 1 to 14 down to 14 chapters of whichever gospel we're in. And then after that, starting again back to 1. So conceptually, the repetition of the 14 cards means that these archetypes have the capacity to double or triple or quadruple and so on and so forth. They could even way more than that. They could just keep on providing meaning, different stories to the same image, which is an amazing feature of archetypes. They could have many meanings, and many different stories could fit within the same archetype. And there's also some instances when we double these cards. So let's say you have chapter 1 is the ace of that suit. If when we start again at chapter 15 with the ace again, they have strange parallels that appear in the storyline often. And just starting off also with Matthew, and this is not a mere side note, but it's something that I'll circle back to. But starting with the Gospel of Matthew, in the very first chapter, he writes about 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 generations from King David to the deportation to Babylon, and then 14 generations from the deportation to Jesus. So we have 14, 14, 14, which gives us 3 suits and 1 missing suit. And before I get deeper into those 14 generations, I'll come right back to it. But also I wanted to mention thematically, we have another interesting occurrence with 14s in that it gives us the theme of each gospel. If you lay down the cards 1 to 14 and then lay them down again to the end of whichever gospel you're at, that last card will give you the theme that we've discussed in the first introduction video. Will give you the theme of that gospel itself. The Gospel of Matthew has 28 cards, and in the Gospel of Matthew we have the King of Wands, and the theme in the Gospel of Matthew is the kingdom of heaven and Jesus Christ as the King of the Jews. In the Gospel of Mark, we have the Two of Pentacles, and this is a sort of valet-looking character, a servant-looking character, and the theme in the Gospel of Mark is Jesus as a suffering servant. In the Gospel of Luke, we have the Ten of Swords, and Luke's theme is that of a savior for all the people, or one that speaks of removing one's own interests for the good of a much higher, grander truth, which this man here dies for the truth that is behind him, a much grander truth. And the fourth and last gospel, the Gospel of John, we have the Seven of Cups, and John's theme is that of Jesus as God, the great mystery at the center of the universe, at the center of the psyche, as the truer, higher focus at the center of all. And also coming back to that first chapter I was talking about earlier of the 14 and 14 generations in Matthew 1, we could also surmise that they represent 3 ages. So the generations go from Abraham to David, the first 14 generations, and then from David to the deportation, and then the deportation to Jesus. So we could surmise that the first age is an age of wands, or a fiery age, an age of fire, which would have to do with what fire has to do with perseverance, action, movement. And that's exactly that age, Abraham to David. There's a lot of perseverance and action and moving forward. and just doing what must be done. From David to the deportation, we'd have then an age of pentacles, which is the element of earth, which speaks of increase in wealth, comfort, of basically easing oneself into a certain groove. Basically, David starts the kingdom, and lots of riches come into the house of Israel once David comes in. And then from the exile to Jesus, we would have an age of swords, which is the element of air, giving us an era of thoughts, ideas, concepts, an era of philosophy. And interestingly, in the Greek world, this is when the age of philosophy started. Right around the time of the exile, we have the first Greek philosophers that lasted about 500 years. To about the time of Jesus, we have the great philosophers, which would fit very nicely with an age of swords. So then we'd be left with one last unmentioned suit, the suit of cups, that is absent in the testimony of Matthew. He only has 14 ages 3 times. And this could possibly represent a mysterious final age after the coming of Jesus, a spiritual age, because the cups has a very spiritual focus. And this might represent a final or a post-Jesus age, a spiritual age after the death of Jesus, perhaps with different time spans that reach up until today. But what it definitely speaks about, it definitely fits with a pre-Abrahamic age, like before Abraham, before what Matthew mentions, because Matthew starts with Abraham as the genealogy. The genealogy in the Bible and the Old Testament goes further than Abraham, and you could actually fit the cups. You could fit the cups, the suit of cups, the 14 cards, into a pre-Abrahamic generation or era, if you will, an age of water, an age of more spiritual themes. I'm going to make probably a later video, probably like the Minor Arcana through the ages, about the specifics of those generations.